Boker Tov, Santa Barbara, and Erev Tov in Petah Tikva, and greetings to friends of Israel around the country, around the world. Shana Tova, Happy New Year to everybody celebrating. Here in Washington, D.C., where I'm at today, it's a beautiful day, and I don't know who's going to be creating a sukkah in their backyard, but perhaps anyone tuning in today will be inspired to learn about the roots, to learn about the celebration, to learn about the many friends of Israel and the Jewish people around the world who have found a way to celebrate this incredible experience with us. My name is Wayne Firestone. I'm the executive director of the America-Israel Friendship League, and we have a power-packed webinar today, the fourth in our series of multi-faith encounters through webinars led by Rabbi Eric Greenberg, who I'll introduce in a moment. First, we want to make sure those of you that are joining us today ask and want to ask questions or want to interact with us, please do so. First of all, for those here on Zoom in the chat box, why don't you tell us about a meaningful time where you paid a visit in a sukkah? Just tell us the name of the place where you were that brought you a warm feeling or warm memory. Maybe it was in Israel, maybe it was around the corner, maybe it was in a place that you lived previously. But it is a significant thing to be a guest and to be hosted in a sukkah. And so if you have a warm memory of a particular place that you visited, maybe you could share that with us. For those of you on Facebook, also we'll welcome you to share that as well during the broadcast. So as we explore today what it means to be a friend indeed, which is the name of our series we've been doing over these past several months, we're joined by many friends indeed. Friends who understand and celebrate with Israel in ways that are creative and new and yet based on very deep beliefs and traditions. So Rabbi Greenberg, I'm going to turn over to you. I know you've assembled today a group of friends and a continuing partnership we have with the Consul Generals in the United States, and we're excited to share in this holiday period, perhaps something that people know a little bit less about. Along the way, if you do have questions, please share them with us, and we'll try to get to as many as we can over the course of the hour.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone who's watching on Zoom and Facebook. With the amazing panelists we have with us today, I think it's best to dive right in. 2 days ago, millions of Jews around the world fasted for 25 hours. No food, no water, observing Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. They were praying and atoning for their sins from the previous year. They asked God to inscribe them in the book of life for the Jewish New Year of 5781. These prayers are particularly poignant this year as the coronavirus pandemic continues unabated, resulting in the death of more than 1 million people around the world and millions more infected. But today, after the solemn Yom Kippur observance, observant Jews pivot to prepare for another biblically commanded holiday called Sukkot, or in English, the Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, Jewish liturgy calls it our season of gladness. Sukkot has been a primary Jewish holiday for thousands of years. But in recent decades, some American Christians have begun celebrating Sukkot every year, traveling to Israel to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Today, we will explore this fascinating turn of events and what it means for Israel and Jewish-Christian relations. I'm privileged today to welcome our panel of esteemed faith and community leaders to what promises to be an enlightening and inspiring discussion. Here's some background on each of them. First up is Rabbi Elazar Muskin. Rabbi Muskin serves as senior rabbi of Young Israel of Century City, a position he's held since 1986. Under his leadership, the congregation has become one of the fastest growing Orthodox synagogues on the West Coast. Before entering the rabbinate, Rabbi Muskin served as executive director of Tchiyah Volunteers in Israel, helping establish a summer program for American college students. He's the first Los Angeles rabbi ever to serve as president of the Rabbinical Council of America, the national Orthodox rabbinical body. Rabbi Muskin received his rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University and studied at Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavne in Israel. He also has a master's degree in medieval Jewish philosophy and in education. Next is Bishop Robert Stearns, founder and executive director of Eagle's Wings, a dynamic evangelical ministry known for its humanitarian outreach and building bridges of relationship and cooperation. Bishop Stearns has ministered in 32 nations around the world, while also serving as the overseeing bishop of the historic Full Gospel Tabernacle in Orchard Park in our beloved Buffalo, New York. He is the visionary behind the worldwide prayer initiative, the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem, which is observed annually on the first Sunday of October. It's considered one of the largest Christian prayer movements in history focused on Jerusalem. Robert is also a world-class musician who's performed at Carnegie Hall, and I can tell you it's well worth hearing him sing. Now to Dr. Hillel Newman, who since July 2019 is the Consul General of Israel serving the Pacific Southwest. Consul General Newman is a highly respected author, academic, and statesman. His diplomatic experience includes serving as a policy advisor to 3 Israeli foreign ministers, ambassador to Uzbekistan, and Deputy Consul General in Boston. As director of the World Jewish Affairs Department, he has been intimately involved in the most current and pressing issues on the global Jewish agenda. Dr. Newman made Aliyah to Israel with his family from South Africa and served as a medic in the IDF. He is married to Ayala, and they have a 10-year-old son, Ram. And batting cleanup today is Bishop Kenneth C. Ulmer, who has been senior pastor of Faithful Central Bible Church in Los Angeles since 1982. Dr. Ulmer founded Macedonia Bible Church in San Pedro, California. He is currently the presiding bishop over Macedonia International Bible Fellowship, an association of pastors representing ministries in Africa and the United States. Bishop Ulmer is the founder and CEO of the Ulmer Institute, a nonprofit organization focused on the research, training, and treatment of psychological trauma in urban communities. He's written several books, including his latest book, Walls Can Fall: Race, Reconciliation, and Righteousness in a Divided World. And I'm sure it's available at your local bookstore and Amazon anywhere. Dr. Ulmer and his wife have been married for over 40 years and have 2 daughters, a son, and 5 grandchildren. God bless. So now let's turn to Rabbi Muskin to help us set our Sukkot table. Rabbi Muskin.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Greenberg. It's really an honor to be on this panel with Consul General Dr. Hillel Newman, Bishop Robert Stearns, and my good friend, Bishop Ken Ulmer. When I was invited to participate on this program, celebrating diversity and celebrating our love for the Holy Land, I realized that this program is perfectly timed. There is no festival in the Hebrew Bible that celebrates universality as much as the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday of Tabernacles. It was on this holiday, the Bible tells us, that 70 sacrifices were brought in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. And the rabbis of the Talmud say, why 70? And 70 is a key number in rabbinic thought. It means the nations of the world. We're praying for the nations of the world on Sukkot. And we also pray on Sukkot for rain, that humanity should have rain, the appropriate rain, that will produce great crops that we will all be able to live from. But we're a bit ahead of ourselves. I've been asked to take you on a tour of the Hebrew Bible that will explain to you what Sukkot is all about. And finally, I'm going to demonstrate how powerful the message of Sukkot is that resonates with Jews and Christians around the world. Let's begin with a passage in the book of Exodus from 34:22. The Torah, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible tells us the holiday of Sukkot is called Chag Ha'asif, or the Harvest Festival. Sukkot takes place when the farmer harvests his crops, and it's brought in from the fields right before the rainy season begins in the Middle East. In the Torah, each of the 3 pilgrimage holidays, may it be Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, Pentecost, or Sukkot, Tabernacles, is identified with an agricultural season. I believe that's not by accident. The agricultural season identifies and makes it a here and now for the farmer who's developing the crops that he's going to live from. In other words, it's the reality that man finds himself. But the Bible doesn't leave it as an agricultural season. We all know there are historic moments associated and celebrated with each of the pilgrimage holidays. When it comes to Pesach, to Passover, of course, we celebrate freedom from the tyranny of the ancient Egyptians, and we focus on the story of Exodus. Shavuot, or Pentecost, celebrates the great moment of revelation at Sinai. And finally, what's the holiday of Sukkot all about? The Torah tells us, it reminds us that the miracles that occurred while we wandered in the desert for 40 years is what Sukkot is all about. Knowing this, we can now appreciate the two main rituals that are associated with the celebration of Sukkot. They are outlined for us in the Bible in Leviticus 23:42. Let's begin there. The first is, Basukot teshvu shivat yomim. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. Sukkot itself means the booths we dwell in for the 7 days of the holiday. But why do we leave our secure, beautiful homes for 7 days and go outside and live in a very humble booth that is far from secure? The Torah doesn't leave us hanging. In the very next verse, in Leviticus 23:43, we're taught that this was all done to remind the Jew of his wandering in the desert, when God miraculously provided for every possible need, including providing shelter in the Sukkot. In Hebrew it says, and we'll translate, L'man yedu dorotechem, ki basukot hoshafti et b'nei Yisrael, v'otzi otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, ani Hashem Elokechem. That your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in Sukkot, in booths, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. The message is clear. Sukkot is to remind the celebrant that God is his source of security. We so often think that we are our own sources of our own security. Sukkot, ladies and gentlemen, is a reality check, reminding us that he is the true source of security, just like he was when we wandered in the desert. Dwelling in Sukkot, however, doesn't offer us the complete picture of the holiday. The Torah instructs for us in Leviticus 23:40 with a second ritual that is known in Hebrew as the Arba Minim, the 4 agricultural species. The 4 species were the date palm, which is called in Hebrew the lulav, the citron, which is called in Hebrew the etrog, the branches of myrtle, the hadassim, and finally the willow branches, the aravot. The Jew is commanded to lift these 4 species, representing the bounty he has harvested, not as a celebration of his success or his personal ingenuity as a very skilled farmer. Rather, they are lifted for one purpose: to thank God for the gift of the produce he has grown during the year. The ritual can be observed anywhere on the globe, and it is observed everywhere on the globe. But originally, if you take a look in the Bible, it tells us that it was really intended to be done for 7 days, the 7 days of the holiday, inside the holy temple, the Beit HaMikdash, in the city of Jerusalem. When waving the 4 species in each direction, and that's what we do with them, we hold them and then we wave them in each direction. The 4 species, we sing chapters from the book of Psalm. Why? Because we're thanking God for our harvest. Let's for a moment focus our attention on the one species that is most noticeable from all of them. It is the one that defines the blessing. When the Jew lifts these 4 species, he makes a bracha, he makes a blessing. He says, Al netilat lulav. He says, I'm lifting the palm frond. Interesting. Why does he focus on the palm frond? And that's the one I want to focus on today. Firstly, we should note, it wasn't just any palm frond, it was the date palm. This is significant because the Holy Land was known for its date palm. When the Bible mentions that Israel is a land flowing of milk and honey, ladies and gentlemen, the honey isn't bee honey. It's date honey. So ubiquitous was the date palm in Judea that it became the symbol of Judea. In one report dated from the Romans conquering of Judea, they found in the Jordan Valley a thick forest of date palms that towered 80 feet high and covered 7 miles wide. By using the date palm, we are using the supreme symbol of the land of Israel and its harvest. By celebrating in such a way, Sukkot is really a celebration of nature. But with this celebration came 2 messages: rejection of paganism and a rejection of human hubris. God is not nature. God created nature. This was a revolution, for the pagans viewed nature as divine. Sukkot reminds us that God was the one who led us through the desert, and God is the one who created nature. But the second message is also very important. The Jewish farmer is not to think that he is responsible for his harvest. Rather, it's a gift from God. When he holds the 4 species, what does he see? Does he see his own handiwork or a gift from God? Sukkot teaches the farmer to thank God for his harvest. When it came to post-biblical time, what is most fascinating, and Rabbi Greenberg, you alluded to it, is that the rabbis named this holiday by one word. In the Talmud, whenever you see this word, you know it's Sukkot. When they refer to this holiday, they refer to it as the Chag, the festival. It's the festival that's labeled Zman Simchatenu, the time of great celebration. The ultimate happiness is when we can acknowledge all that we own comes from the Almighty, and then one really celebrates a life. Allow me to end by sharing with you a great story that I think captures the moral messages that we've now outlined. The story was actually published in an online magazine called Tablet back in January 30th, 2013. And the writer is Devorah Klein Lev Tov.
Rabbi Muskin?
Yes.
Could we wait for the Tablet story towards the end? And let's get to the next step in our journey here. We want to show a clip right now of how the Christian evangelicals from America are now taking the celebration of Sukkot and going to Jerusalem. Can we cue that clip, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, on every first Sunday in the month of October,
גבירותיי ורבותיי, בכל יום ראשון הראשון של חודש אוקטובר,
every single year,
בכל שנה,
more than 300,000 churches all across the world,
יותר מ-300,000 קהילות מאמינים בכל רחבי העולם,
in more than 170 nations,
ביותר מ-170 מדינות,
are praying every October for the feast of the peace of the people of Israel.
מתפללים בכל חודש אוקטובר, בתחילת החודש, עבור השלום של אזרחי ישראל.
It's called a global day of prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.
זה נקרא היום הבינלאומי לתפילה לשלום ירושלים.
It's probably the largest initiative to unite churches all around the world to support Israel.
אנחנו מעריכים שזו היוזמה הבינלאומית הגדולה ביותר לתמיכה בישראל בתפילה.
The founder of this initiative is called Robert Stearns.
המייסד של היוזמה הזו נקרא רוברט סטרנס.
He's the president of Eagles Wings Ministry.
והוא הנשיא או המנהל הכללי של Eagles Ministries.
He was living here on this land for a number of years.
הוא ביקר כאן בארץ במשך שנים רבות.
He serves today as bishop of a large congregation in North America.
והוא מתפקד כבישופ של קהילה בצפון אמריקה.
And he's with us here tonight.
שהוא חי.
The people of Israel live.
עם ישראל חי.
עם ישראל חי. Lift up a shout of hallelujah.
בואו נרים צעקה של הללויה.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to Bishop Robert Stearns, who will tell us a little more about what we just saw and how it started.
Well, it's an honor to be here today among so many great friends. And I just want to begin by expressing my appreciation for Wayne Firestone and his leadership of the AIFL, the important work that the AIFL is doing. And so honored to be with my dear friend, Consul General Hillel Newman, and of course, Bishop Ulmer, who has done pioneering work. Bishop Ulmer has done extraordinary pioneering work for many, many years in the Jewish-Christian dialogue, along with his great friend, Rabbi Muskin. So thank you, Rabbi Greenberg, for bringing us all together. And, you know, Rabbi Muskin has laid an incredible foundation for us in focusing on the unique universality of Sukkot. The scriptures portend this sense of universal celebration. We can look at Zechariah chapter 14, and it tells us that there's coming a day when the nations of the earth, it says, I'm in verse 16 of chapter 14, will go up year after year to worship Hashem in Yerushalayim, and that they will keep the Feast of Sukkot. And so that's what we're talking about, is the history of this, but also why has this caught on in the modern age in such a way that the clip you just showed is from the annual Feast of Tabernacles celebration, the Christian Feast of Tabernacles celebration that happens every year in Yerushalayim. So in the few minutes that I have, let me try to give a little bit of a backstory of this. First of all, I think it's really amazing and instructive to note that throughout the Torah and throughout the scriptures, we have these amazing friendships between Jewish leaders and non-Jewish leaders that become pivotal in human history. We have this relationship between Abraham and Melchizedek. Abraham and Melchizedek have this interaction and this relationship that becomes very important. We have Moshe Rabbeinu and we have Yitro, Moses and his father-in-law Jethro, the Jew and the Gentile, and Jethro gives advice and support and counsel to Moses that becomes very important. And there's many other examples, but we won't take time to go into them. But I want to go to a modern day example that I think has been lost in history, and it's foundational to understand the modern celebration of the Feast of Sukkot. Bibi Netanyahu, about 2 years ago, gave a speech at Yad Vashem in which he said these incredible words. The prime minister said, "I do not believe that modern Jewish Zionism would have been successful were it not for the atmosphere and backdrop of Christian Zionism that surrounded it." I mean, this is an extraordinary statement to make. But when we look back to Theodor Herzl, we find that Theodor Herzl's best friend and partner throughout all that he did in laying the foundation of the Jewish state was an evangelical pastor named William Heckler. William Heckler's memory has all too often been lost in history, but it was really Heckler that introduced Herzl to a lot of the crowned heads of Europe and gained him access where he could share the vision of the rebirth of the state. This amazing little book, which is now sadly out of print, called The Prince and the Prophet, details their friendship. So there's always been anecdotal, prototypical Christian Zionist support. But then we fast forward now past the rebirth of the state in 48, the reunification of Jerusalem in 67, and we come to the year 1980. And right around the late 70s, early 80s, the embassies began to pull out of Jerusalem. Many nations had their embassies in Jerusalem, and they began to pull out and they began to move to Tel Aviv. Well, in that time, in the year specifically 1980, there were a handful of leaders, a man named Derek Prince, a Bible teacher, profound Bible teacher, Oxford educated, named Derek Prince, a man named Jan Willem van der Hoeven, and who is still alive and living in Israel, and then a musical couple named Merv and Merla Watson. And in 1980, they said all these embassies are leaving Jerusalem. They're moving to Tel Aviv. we want to stand with the Jewish people. We want to honor them. And so they hosted a party. And they said, we're going to do a party around the modern celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. It says in Scripture that one day that will be celebrated by the nations. We are from the nations, but we have come to align ourselves with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with the Jewish people. So they launched a party, never knowing what it would become. The next year, hundreds of people heard about this and showed up. And they invited Teddy Kollek, the iconic mayor of Jerusalem. He came and they said, will you allow us to open the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem? And the ICEJ was launched. That annual Feast of Tabernacles was birthed in the heart of the nations, of the Christians. And now it is the single largest annual tourist event in Israel. It is the single largest event. It gathers 7,000 to 10,000 every year, normally from every nation on earth. They do an amazing parade of the nations, and we have the nations of the earth. This is the first year since 1992 that I have not been able to be there and be a part of that celebration, and it pains my heart. I'm saying, Imesh Chechek Yerushalayim, right? I'm not in Jerusalem. It's a problem. And so this is the 40th year. Isn't that interesting? Here, where we cannot go up, this is the 40th year of the rebirth, not the rebirth, but of the recognition of Sukkot by the global Christian community. It harkens back to friendships like Heckler and Herzl, this cooperation that has been in pivotal moments throughout human history, and specifically throughout modern Jewish history, and it comes from these courageous early Christian Zionists who gathered together in 1980 and said, while all the other embassies are leaving, we're going to establish the Christian embassy in Jerusalem. And so for the past 40 years, it has become the premier annual event gathering Christians from the nations of the earth. So I hope that is a quick thumbnail sketch to explain to us how this has grown globally over the past decades.
That's wonderful, Bishop Robert. And we'll get back to how we celebrate in this year and in the future in a few minutes. Now we're going to turn to Consul General Hillel Newman, who will take the ball and talk about all the wonderful things happening with Christian-Israel relations.
Shalom, everybody. It is truly my honor and pleasure to join such a distinguished panel. Rabbi Eric Greenberg, Rabbi Muskin, Bishop Stearns, and Bishop Dr. Ken Ulmer. And of course, special thanks to the leadership of the AIFL team, Jonathan Barsadeh and Wayne Firestone and the whole team. It is truly my pleasure to join you. And I'll just say briefly, talk a little bit about the Christian community in Israel and the building of bridges. Let me start off with a few facts that Israel today holds approximately 180,000 Christian followers, which is about 2% of the population of Israel. About 70% live in the north, which is the Nazareth area. But so the biggest towns in Israel are Nazareth, and then Haifa, and then Jerusalem. That's the order of the population of the Christian community in Israel. But the interesting characteristic is that there is a growth of the Christian community in Israel. According to the most recent statistic, it's between 1.5 to 2% every year, which is striking. If you look at the background of the Middle East in general, in the Middle East in general, there's been a decrease in the Christian population from 20% to 5% over the past period of time, whereas in Israel, there's a growth. Of course, there are reasons for this, and we will mention some of them right now. What I'd like to mention are the special education achievements of the Christian population in Israel as a model, as an example of the thriving Christian community in Israel. Over 70% of the Christian community have full matriculation, which is one of the highest percentages. It's equivalent to the Jewish community, and it's one of the highest proportions. 3 out of every 4 Christians who live in Israel have a master's degree, and 74% are women. 63% of the Christian community have a postgraduate degree, which is the highest of any religious community. So this is just an example of what's happening for the Christian community in Israel. And I would say that part of this is also the fact that, of course, they have free practice of religion in every way possible in the state of Israel. I would quote someone, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, who said the following: Israel is the only country in which Christian communities grow and thrive in the Middle East. So I don't want to go into the statistics and check whether we are the only country, but I think that we are one of the top countries in that aspect. Israel builds a lot of bridges with all denominations of the Christian community. We don't work with one denomination over another. In fact, it's a very sensitive balance between the different denominations in Israel. And we ensure these bridges by the following aspects. First of all, full freedom of practice with no restrictions. The only restriction is that it doesn't incur on the rights of another religious community. So there are very sensitive balances. For instance, if you take the old city in Jerusalem, where you have different Christian communities living side by side in a very densely populated area, then you have to be very sensitive to make sure that one Christian community or one community does not incur on the rights of the other community, and Israel plays a very large part in this. Secondly, it's the preservation of the sites, of course, the religious sites, ensuring freedom of access and freedom of worship in all the different sites. Thirdly, it's the issue of pilgrimage. So many, hundreds of thousands of Christians in a normal year can visit Israel and do visit Israel and pay their respect to their faith by visiting Jerusalem and visiting the holy sites in Israel. And that is also, of course, part of the freedom of practice. I would say another aspect of ensuring these bridges is the participation of Israeli officials at Christian events. You will see top senior Israeli officials participating at the different Christian events. And there are official meetings, like, for instance, the president of Israel hosts the different leaders of the Christian denominations every year, and so also the prime minister and other top officials of the country. As I said, all denominations enjoy a wonderful freedom, which is a sensitive balance. It's a sensitive balance on a daily basis. What is the attraction of the state of Israel? Of course, it's the Holy Land. And we are blessed with the fact that we have this rare mix, unique mix of the ancient and the modern, and the ancient is preserved as much as possible. Access to all the sites. I'd like to mention one more thing about Sukkot. What is the special significance of Sukkot? Rabbi Muskin gave us a wonderful display of the biblical aspects of it, and I'd just like to take one thing from what Rabbi Muskin was mentioning, and that is the trust. The fact that the people of Israel were prepared to give their trust in going to flimsy houses and showing their trust. This, of course, is also a trust in the future prophecy. Bishop Stearns mentioned Zechariah, and I'd like to mention the prophecy of Zechariah, which is actually in chapter 8. In chapter 8, Zechariah the prophet says, "I will return to Zion, dwell in Jerusalem. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing." At that time, it was a utopian prophecy, which everyone thought has no basis in reality. The people of Israel were exiled, spread around the world under deep oppression. That prophecy has come true, and we see it with our own eyes. So also, therefore, we give special significance to the other prophecy which Bishop Stearns mentioned about the rise of Jerusalem in chapter 14 of Zechariah, and Jerusalem will be secure, and all nations should come and celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles. So the Festival of Tabernacles has the special significance of bringing everyone together. Lastly, we've seen a ray of light coming out in these dark days of COVID-19 and other. We have seen a ray of light coming out from the Middle East, and that is the peace between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain. And also was mentioned before by Bishop Stearns, the embassies and the coming to Jerusalem. We've just heard last week that Honduras has announced that it will move its embassy to Jerusalem. If this is not a realization of the prophecies of Zechariah and the other prophets, then what is? We are really seeing the realization of these prophets coming true before our eyes. I'd like to wish you all have a good year, and thank you for joining in this wonderful interfaith coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General. Very, very instructive. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Bishop Ulmer, who will relate his own particular history and connection with Israel and the Jewish community.
Thank you, Rabbi Eric and Rabbi Elazar, and my friends for many, many years, Dr. Stearns, and of course, Dr. Hillel. Thank you so much. Wayne, thank you. My first encounter with Sukkot was as a student at University of Judaism, which is now the American Jewish University, I believe. And out of nowhere, for me, it was out of nowhere, our teacher, Dr. Turner, said, "We will hold class next week in my Sukkot, in my sukkah." I thought we were going to go camping in his backyard. I didn't know what was going on, but he said the class will meet in my sukkah, in my back, and he went on to explain it to me, and it just blew me out. Again, I thought we were going to continue to do something scholastic and something intellectual, and he said we're going to hang out in this backyard, you know, in this little tent, you know. But it spoke to my heart. It spoke to my heart because it made a connection with me of a journey. And that's the point I want to emphasize. I don't think I know of one. I don't think I know of one African-American church. I don't know of one Black church that celebrates Sukkot. I don't know of one. Pentecost, yes. Feast of Tabernacles, yes, for some, but I don't know of one. But it emphasizes to me that we meet not so much on the common ground of ritual, but on the common ground of relationship. That our relationship has historical and biblical significance. The life of the Jew is centered around studying of Torah, the study of Torah. African Americans do not have that kind of legacy. We sang the Bible before we could read the Bible. We were not allowed to read. It was against the law to read. And so we would sing the stories of scripture. We would sing the stories of Moses. We would sing the stories of deliverance. And we picked up on that motif, and that's what carried us through. Our sukkah was more of a slave hut. And it was passed down that in these gatherings in the slave Christian communities, these stories were told about the journey, about the history in the Bible that we could not read, but we would sing. And so we would encouch our theology in our musicology. Our theology would be encouched in our hymnology, if you will. And we met and found that we had a common ground of journey and a common ground of justice. We saw that God was a God of deliverance. God was a God who sided with, who stood with the oppressed, with the downtrodden. And so we tracked the journey. I remember when my first trip to Israel was likened to my first trip to Africa. My first trip to Africa, I felt like I had finally found my ethnic roots. My first trip to Israel is where I found my spiritual roots. And so I saw this connection with the people of God, and I saw the revelation of God in the history, in the journey of the people of God. And so sure it is that we have shared even in the broader culture and with oppression and with slavery and the Holocaust and all that. But we have seen the constancy, the consistency of the presence and power of God. That's what we share. We share a story that is encouched in a journey, and that journey beyond just our rituals, but in that relationship of serving a God and trusting in God who is a deliverer and who has been a deliverer for us. And so we pass that down, and rather than celebrating all of the different feasts, some we do, some we don't, but more than that, we zoom the lens out and we come together in a sincere relationship that goes not only from the Bible and, of course, the relationship between Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel and all of those things, but they are a part of a journey. And that's what we thank God for. Our relationship is a part of a journey, and is a journey that focuses on a God of justice. And so we meet on journey, we meet on justice. We meet on the common ground of celebrating a God who is for the oppressed, a God who is a deliverer, the God who is one who brings us out. And even in this time of pandemic, and for some a time of panic, we hold to the same God. I have a spiritual son who is a Black, Ethiopian, Jewish, Christian, Pentecostal. He says, I'm some of everything, Daddy. I'm some of everything. He's a Black Jew from Ethiopia, and he pastors a church there in Jerusalem. And as the Consul General said, as Dr. Hillel said, many people do not understand the richness of the diversity in the land of Israel, and particularly in the land of Jerusalem. And so that's a part of a continuing journey and a continual relationship. And we continue to walk together, trusting the same God.
Thank you, Bishop Ulmer. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. As we know this year, I think we'll take some questions from the audience. I'd like to start with something Bishop Stearns alluded to earlier. As we know, this year is different. To paraphrase another Jewish pilgrimage holiday, why is this year different from any other? Well, pandemic. So in this situation, I'm going to ask each of you to take a couple of minutes to discuss how you think that's is affecting and going to affect how we continue to build our relationships over the next year or so when we might not be able to meet in person. So we can start with, let's start with Rabbi Muskin, and we'll proceed from there.
I think it's going to be a test, but I don't think it should in any way inhibit relationships that Bishop Ulmer is referring to, and that's what's really going to be essential. Location is not the essential common denominator here. It's the relationships, and that's what this whole program is about. It's relationships. We're sitting on a panel where the four speakers that you have know each other, and it's not by accident, and we have a wonderful relationship with each other. Robert Stearns, Ken Ulmer, Elazar, Muskin, and Hillel Newman are friends. So I do believe that although COVID is a challenge, it's not going to inhibit relationships one iota.
Bishop Robert, you had talked about this is your first year missing the in-person. How is that affecting you, and how are you going to deal with that?
Well, it's also my children's first year of not being there. My oldest son is 17. He's been to Israel 20 times. My twins, Michael and Daniel, they're 13. They've been there 15 times. And it touched my heart when they came to me and they said, Dad, we're missing Israel so much. But I think what all of us have had to do is just learn to pivot. We've had to learn to adapt. And who has taught us more about adaptation and pivoting than the Jewish people? How do we maintain our values? How do we maintain our beliefs? How do we maintain the core of our identity even when circumstances around us change? So who would have thought a year ago that all of us would become televangelists? But here we are. We're all on Zoom, and we've all become televangelists. You had to do it. So what we've been emphasizing, for example, our ministry, we help underwrite 2 feeding centers in Israel, one in Tiberias and one in Jerusalem, through our partnership with Mayor Panim. And so a lot of our folks have said the money that we were going to spend on the tickets, on the hotels, we're giving. We're going to support, all those, Israel's economy right now is going through this second wave of COVID. And so we're sending our support, we're sending our friendship, we're sending our prayers, and we're adapting, because we've learned from the Jewish people that though outward circumstances change, the inward heart, the inward identity always stays true. And so we're walking that out.
Beautiful. Consul General, obviously, you had mentioned earlier the amazing numbers of Christians who have been coming to Israel, particularly Jerusalem. Has the government been taking any actions, obviously in this particular time where we're worried about, you know, the spread, but what about the next year or so? Is there any preparations?
Sure. In normal circumstances, of course, the Holy Land, State of Israel, would be hosting hundreds of thousands of pilgrimage visitors, tourist pilgrimage visitors, gladly enjoying their presence in Israel. And unfortunately, the pandemic, of course, has caused us to be in a situation where we have to restrict the entry to Israel, which is against the flesh and blood of the people of Israel who wish to host so many in Israel, and we cannot for public health and public safety. When we look forward to the future, of course, then we are hopeful that a vaccine will come out, whether it comes from the United States or Israel or any other place. We are hopeful that a vaccine will come out soon. Over the next year of the Hebrew New Year, I'm sure that there will be a vaccine, and the vaccine, we are quite confident will enable humanity to go back to what it was. I'd just like to say, though, although we have this physical limitation because of the pandemic at the same time has taught us how fragile humanity is and how we should all be united. What happens on one side of the globe affects the entire global community and the entire humanity. Reminds us again of, you know, we just celebrated the Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, where we remember, which marks the creation of the world. And the creation of the world is that we all originated from Adam and Eve. We're all one family. So I think that the pandemic also reminds us that we should be humble and that we are a fragile society. And if we stand together, we'll overcome all difficulties. So along with the difficulties of the pandemic, it also has important moral lessons.
Thank you. You know, Bishop Ken, you had mentioned the relationship between Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel, one of my heroes, both of my heroes, and the iconic photograph of them locked in arms, right, in the protest in Selma. You know, that can't be done today. So how do we take that personal togetherness and translate that into what we're dealing with now?
You know, a very dear friend of mine here in Los Angeles, Rabbi Steve Leder, wrote a book on suffering, and he said he opened the book the same way he closed the book, and he opened with the line that says, "Do not come out empty-handed." Do not come out of suffering. Do not come out of what you're going through something now, but do not come out empty-handed. My prayer is that we will all come out, and we will come out. We will come out. If there's anything about the Jewish people, anything about the people of God, there is a resilience. And so my prayer is that we will come out with something, with a revelation, with a new commitment. Being shut in and being locked in. I mean, we were, you know, Israel was shut in. They were shut in Egypt. They were shut in their houses when the angel passed over. They were shut into the Sukkot, if you will. And so being shut in is not the issue. The issue is, what will it be like when we come out? And according to my friend Rabbi Leder, come out. Don't come out with your hands empty. Don't come out empty-handed. Come out with a new commitment. Come out with a new dedication. Come out with a stronger resilience. Come out with a determination to be involved in the things of God, in terms of justice, in terms of equality, in terms of the things that bring honor to God.
Thank you. Beautiful. We have a couple of questions from the audience I'd like to get to, and they are for first directed to our Christian panelists. One person writes, do Christians view this holiday in the context of climate change? And I'll give you the second question, and whoever wants to field this. And do Christians participate in the mitzvah or the commandment of lulav? I'm not familiar with that, but either Bishop Ken or Bishop Robert, if you want to start with those.
I'm not familiar with that last thing, lulav. What is that?
That's the palm
The
frond.
palm frond.
Yeah. The short answer, as I said earlier, I don't know of any African-American churches that celebrate Sukkot at all. That's the first thing. But again, I think my point is that we share a journey that is beyond just that ritual and is reaffirmed in our relationship. And so the short answer is, no, I don't know any African-American churches that celebrate Sukkot at all.
Great. And Bishop Robert, when you go to Jerusalem, does anyone participate in the ritual of lulav and esrog, the palm frond and the citron?
We do, I would say, in the sense of having it instructional moments. You know, as we see others purchasing them, as we see others engaging in the commemoration of that, we take that as a teaching moment. We explain that, right? Is it the 4 different types of species and etc. So we'll have that as an instructional moment, but I wouldn't say that it become part of our liturgy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question is, I wonder if each of you could share, take a couple of minutes, and your most important interfaith moment, something that really you were early on in your careers, and you met someone from either the Jewish side, the Christian side, or even the Muslim, and any interfaith interaction that really changed you, and that you can say today, this is why I want to be involved in this kind of work. Let's start with Bishop Stearns. You're already on the screen.
Well, there have been so many beautiful moments that are, you know, transcendent and inspirational and keep us going in this important work. My earliest mentor in the Jewish world was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Dr. Gerald Meister. He was they broke the mold when they made this guy. I mean, he spoke 9 languages fluently. He was British. He was raised in the UK. He had this thick British accent, and he looked absolutely like Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, identical. And he would stand up to speak, and he would begin his speeches. He would stand up, he'd say, "Good evening." And, you know, the place would come unglued. But I remember he was my mentor in all of this in the early 90s. And I remember he said something once that changed my life. He said, "Robert, Jews are praying for the coming of Messiah. Christians are praying, as it were, for the second coming of Messiah." He said, we can focus on one of 2 things. He said, we can focus on the fact that we're different in that way, or we can focus on the fact that we are united in faith, praying for the coming of Messiah. And if we focus on that place of unity, that we are praying for the coming of Messiah, the coming of a messianic age, whatever that is, however you interpret that, whatever way that plays out, but we are anchored in hope together, and we are anchored in faith together. So we begin in that place of beautiful unity, and we begin what Bishop Ulmer so beautifully said earlier, we begin spiritual journey together from that place of unity. That becomes, I believe, that changes the whole dynamic, and it sets a beautiful course for us.
Thank you. Consul General, what would be a moment of interfaith interaction that inspired you that this is the way we need to go?
Thank you for the question. I'd like to share with the spectators that I participate twice a year in an interfaith dialogue event with NATO Defense College in Rome. Usually I travel there. This year we're doing it virtually in October, actually, in 2 weeks' time. And the participants are NATO officers, and the majority of them come from Arab and Muslim countries, like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Algeria, places like that. And like a good joke, it's a priest, a Christian priest, usually Catholic. It's an imam, a Muslim imam, and myself. You may ask why they choose me, because I'm not a rabbi, but they choose me because I have a PhD in Jewish history and Jewish sciences. So we sit together on this panel, and what I'd like to share with my impressions, what I remember from this panel is 2 things. One is that every single time the people, the participants, the officers, their senior officers in militaries of different countries, every time someone gets up and says it's the first time he's seen a Jew. And I don't go there as a representative of Israel. I go there as a representative of Judaism. And someone always gets up and says the first time he sees a Jew. Very often also someone says, it's such a wonderful sight to see the three religions coming together and sitting on the same panel. They didn't believe it's possible. And that's because they come from a very politicized Islam kind of a country. And my realization from this is that the real issue out there is radicals against moderates. And in the moderate world, we are all together in the same boat. The last thing I'd like to mention is that with my Christian counterpart, the 3 or 4 times we've been together, the same priest and myself, and after 3 or 4 times, I suggested to him that perhaps I should give his speech for Christianity and he give the speech for Judaism, because we learned each other's talks very well. And there is a lot of similarity.
Thank you. Thank you. Bishop Ken, other than today, what is your favorite interfaith experience?
You know, a partner of mine was the former chief medical officer of the Israeli army, Dr. Eyal Fruchter. As a matter of fact, I met him in the office of the Israeli consulate in America. And he developed a technique for the soldiers of the Israeli army of how to anticipate, how to process trauma. As a matter of fact, we coined it pre-TSD. And the significance for me was that this was developed in the context of a military structure of the wars that Israel had gone through and how to train the soldiers. We took that model and modified it to an urban model. And we began to teach students here in America, here in Los Angeles, here in Compton, here in Watts, how to use those same techniques that began in the foxholes in Israel, and how these kids were able to develop and to deal with trauma in an urban community. And so we have one particular girl who, after taking our course that was taught by an Israeli Jew, by a Jewish friend of mine who created it, the week later, she experienced a drive-by shooting where her friend was shot in the head right in front of her. And the other friend with her, my friend used the techniques that she learned from Dr. Fruchter from Israel to help not only save the lives of others, but to tend to those who were in shock. And so my point is that, again, we share a journey and we share the benefits and the blessings of that journey, and they are mutually beneficial to both of us.
Great, great. We actually have to wrap up. Rabbi Muskin, if you could give us a quick 1 minute
story.
Yes.
My personal experience is it happened during the Intifada, 2002. It was at a temple here, right across the street from AJU, right? Stephen S. Wise, and the man that just spoke was Bishop Ken Ulmer. I spoke before he did, and then he spoke. I still remember what Ken Ulmer said at that event. And I am now a member of the board of the Ulmer Institute, a proud member. I was one of the founding members of the Institute. And I spoke at the inaugurational dinner. And what did I tell? I said the whole story that Ken Ulmer said, the king has one more move. And it was a powerful message. So that's the journey that I began. It was 2002. It was right after Sukkot.
Wow.
You might not have realized it. It was right after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. It was in October 2002. Bombs were going off in Israel. And I became a dear friend of the man who's sitting on this panel with me, Ken Ulmer, and we worked together. If you want to call that interfaith, I agree.
What a wonderful way to end this incredible session. Thank you so much, Rabbi Muskin. Great story. So I'd like to thank everyone. This was so inspiring, educational, productive, and I hope this kind of interaction seen throughout the world will prompt further such discussions by folks to increase cooperation among all faiths and communities. I'd like to remind our audience that AIFL will continue to run our multi-faith webinars with noted leaders from the United States and Israel. And we also invite you to join us on Wednesdays and Sundays for an array of topics and activities, from Zumba to the opera to comparing delis around the country to virtual tours of Israel. All of our events can be found on our website and our social media channels. Everyone, please stay safe, wear a mask, wash your hands, and wishing everyone a Chag Sukkot Sameach, a joyous Feast of Tabernacles.
So, Eric, before we sign off, we just two final notes. Certainly a thank you to all our panelists today for their participation. This chat box has just been exploding with people who have traveled to Israel with Bishop Stearns. In addition to taking his children, he's clearly taken many others as well with him over the years. And I think this idea of the common ground of relationship that we learned about today, we've seen practiced here. Program note for next Wednesday, whether you're sitting in a sukkah or you're sitting in front of your computer looking for something to do, next Wednesday at this exact time, October 7th, we have an amazing program about the legacy of Albert Einstein. On the 100th anniversary of his Nobel Prize winning speech, the Hebrew University has created an incredible digital archive that allows one to actually interact with Albert Einstein. And we have two leading experts on Einstein who will be here with us, so please come join us. And secondly, for those of you that are new to this programming series that Rabbi Greenberg talked about for multi-faith and for the all the different programs that we bring from week to week, we know that we need your support to continue to do this. One of our supporters, Dr. Milch, offered for us a match in this period for all of our viewers, for every dollar, for every shekel, for every peso, for every bit of support that we receive during this holiday period. We're going to receive a matching gift from the Milch Foundation. So I want to request during this period, if you've enjoyed what we're doing, if you enjoyed this program, please look for an opportunity to express that. We showed you the different channels that we operate on social media, on our website, etc. We're happy to have friends from around the world. And with that support, we look forward to bringing you many, many more opportunities to build relationships, even in this most challenging time. So a safe and happy and sweet New Year to everyone here today.